Alrighty, guys, thank you for sticking around for the end of day webinar. We got a lot to talk about today. Some very interesting structure building up here on the market. We have some economic events coming this evening that could influence things, and actually just a lot of different angles to look at this chart going forward for tomorrow and the rest of this week, which I think is going to be actually a very interesting finish to the week on Thursday and Friday, depending on which way we set up. As always, my bias is completely open to both sides, but I see a very clear path for both sides, and I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be a bit of a banger to finish the week for us. I'm just going to quickly go over some of the things that led up to where we are today, and then I'm going to get into some intricacies about today's price action, where it leads us for tomorrow, and then some ideas that I think are going to be really interesting for tomorrow after tonight's news release, which is at 8 p.m. So just a really quick overview. We had finally gotten into a downtrend. We talk about this every day, basically just going over the structure and the overall big picture, but we got into a downtrend and started to see some bearish price actions starting to form on the 4-hour chart last week. Finally got into a big bounce zone under 66.90, which was the last level down that would be likely to have gotten broken in a big pullback. We had a big bounce out of it on Friday, gap up Sunday, and it's been nothing but pretty much upside Monday, Tuesday into today. And today was the first time that we saw sort of a slightly more significant pullback. As I feel like, if you look at basically what Tuesday's pullback was and Monday's pullbacks, those were just tests of the 4-hour chart trends. So what you'll notice is going back from last week, we started to see the signs that sellers were coming in. 69.10 turned into a big level of interest, and we started to see signs that they were failing to recover it, which eventually led to a 4-hour chart breakdown, which then led to the daily chart breakdown. So the daily chart EMA and the daily chart sort of pivot was right there at the 50 area, so it all kind of came undone at once. After one failed bounce attempt overnight, right, that's where we got into some deep selling for a couple of days, then again led to the big bounce zone under 66.90, which it came firing out of Friday, gapping up into Sunday. And this is where things got a little bit tricky this week because it was more of like a dip buyer's market. We had a big pullback on Monday, and it was just a quick dip to that 4-hour EMA. It got gobbled up really quickly, and we continued higher, kind of left longs too late to be buying, at least from a day trading perspective, into the close or even shortly after the open. The only two pullbacks we've had to really test this 4-hour chart trend, and remember it was mostly in a downtrend for the majority of last week with the exception of one failed attempt higher than other than that. It was in a downtrend until we recovered it. So this becomes a big level for us to watch. Monday's dip held. Monday overnight going into Tuesday pre-market, we had a failed breakdown. This was actually technically a decent bigger picture long setup, 1-hour chart and 4-hour chart flag through 52 that we discussed yesterday, but kind of a wide stop from a day trading perspective. But from a bigger picture perspective, absolutely the 1-hour chart and 4-hour chart players had a setup there. We had some target levels in mind, namely for longs, namely 44 was the first one. These are all daily chart levels where shorts would be stopping out from on previous days. 60 was another one. That's like the first areas that we reached on Monday. And then the higher ones going into today were 84, a daily chart candles high from Monday, and 93, I think it was 94, 93.50 right there. So a lot of big targets have been reached for the bounce players coming out of last Friday's deep dip, and even for those that maybe got long on Monday or even Tuesday. That led us to a chart today where by the time we got to the open, it was kind of like we discussed yesterday, there was kind of two possibilities here. One was we do a bit of a blow off top into 69.10 plus, which is, I would 100% expect this. If we had opened strong today and pushed, I would definitely expect this to be an area where we'd get a pullback from. So that would have served well for like kind of a blow off top area to look for a counter trend short signal, as we call it. And the alternative was, if we were going to be looking at new longs coming into a day like today, we would definitely need to see at least the sellers try to do a sort of a failed breakdown and then recover and then start to set up a new flag. I really like the idea today that if we got the blow off top through 69.10, we'd have plenty of room for a back test of this trend, and it would be a huge target for longs. Particularly that level is of interest to me because of the weekly chart high from last week. So it's sort of like that last point. Let me just show you on a chart that's not all marked up. It'll be a little easier to see here. If we look at perhaps a MAS chart or even SPX, but for the shorts that would have entered in this last week, that's kind of the last point they have to stop out from besides the all-time high. So if they're using the weekly chart high from last week, we have, it's based, 69, 69.10, 69.09.50. So I would expect that to be a short-term resistance zone without really much of a doubt if we had gotten there today in an early push. So the result this morning was, it was clearly too extended to be looking at new longs early in the day. So we absolutely kind of needed this to pull back. And if we weren't going to get a push and a blow off top into 69.10 to look for short, we definitely needed a pullback. I think we needed more than just a retest of the 4-hour EMA. We wanted to see a break of the trend. And the trend we've been working on for the last, well, for this week, essentially. So Monday's low after the dip, Tuesday's higher low, 68.31. And so today was the first day I feel like that not only did longs have a reason to sell from a profit take perspective, because if you look at it from the perspective of the last setup that we saw on the 1-hour chart and 4-hour chart, technically for the hourly chart players and 4-hour chart players, was this 52 break. And they would have been obviously risking a little bit wide there, especially considering the market had already moved up about 200 or so points from those lows on Friday. But technically speaking, 52 risking 30 was kind of their spot. And like I would say, like it kind of the sweet spot for profit takes on trades like that is about 2.5 hour. And that's basically what the move was. So to me, when we got back, into the open today, and I can see that these longs from Tuesday, which I feel like the Monday was harder one to catch. It was a sharp dip, and then it just really blew through quickly on that 68.10 break back to the upside. This was a little bit cleaner for people to see as a setup, as a multi-day flag after a failed breakdown on the hourly chart. But yeah, I mean, going into today, we're talking about like these guys here at 52, risking almost 20 points. I mean, they pretty much got their 2.5, nearly 3R out of the trade. So it's just naturally, in addition to that being a profit take zone, most likely for longs, they were probably looking for over 93.25, which was the next target zone for me on the long side. And then a big target, like a big bonus, would be 69.10 plus. But coming into the open today, having already kind of been at a point where these longs from yesterday, they had to wait all night into this morning to reach that target. It didn't reach it until after 2 a.m. But with that, and then seeing that the 4-hour chart is now quite extended from the trend that we know is holding, and then the multi-day trend line that's been holding higher lows, it was obvious not to be a long at the open today. So the only thing that really would make sense here, like I said, is one of two trades. Either break higher and look for a short up here, which I love that idea if we did, because we'd have the extension, or secondly would be to break lower, test under the trend, like I call it like a shakeout or a failed breakdown, then reset, hold a higher low, and then set up our new flag for the next push higher. And today, on a day like today, guys, like I mentioned to you earlier, like we were talking about in stream, I expect the first dip, even if it breaks a trend, to get bought. So we were definitely looking at this in terms of the area around and or under 50 to be a potential bounce zone in the short term. So I was actually looking for longs down there today. Because even if we were going lower, it would be it's very likely that this first dip gets bought. And if we're going lower, typically we'll see a lower high form, back test the trend. And then if a lower high forms, then we're going to end up lower. But we ended up testing the 50 level. We didn't clear the longs out from yesterday. They had their profit takes, I think, up here, and they might have had some reasons to sell, I think, on the trend break. It was the first point where we actually had a deep test below the 4-hour EMA, which would have triggered some sell pressure for sure. But today is not the day to be shorting for me back under this area. I expect that first dip to get bought. We're still in an uptrend on the daily chart. It's just a sort of a first decent dip and pullback in an uptrend. after nearly 250 points of upside. So it's pretty natural to have a correction like that, and it's not enough to get me on the short side yet, but it leads us to some fairly interesting structures that we're going to look at going into tomorrow, and some setups that I think are going to be interesting to look at going into tomorrow. Before we talk about the possible setups we'll be looking at, some big things are coming out tonight. So at 8 p.m. tonight, they're making a decision on the government shutdown. So this has been like the longest government shutdown in history, if I'm recalling correctly. And so the decision that made at 8 p.m. is going to be impactful on the market, but it's going to be impactful both on a small time frame and a bigger scale as well. So the micro scale is that, obviously if they resume if they discontinue the shutdown and resume business as usual, probably there'll be like a little micro move on it where like buyers will be like, oh great, this is bullish, and just buy the 8 p.m. Move, or vice versa. But the macro view of that is now everyone needs to report. So if these numbers start coming out poorly, then from the macro view, that actually might not be that bullish of a sentiment. It might actually be bearish, because in the short term, okay, that's, I guess maybe people might interpret it as good news, but in the macro sense, it really depends on what kind of numbers come out. CPI data, earnings, all these different things, all these numbers that we've been missing, for the last 45 or so days. So, anyways, guys, yeah. So like that's going to be a factor to keep in mind going into tomorrow. I'm hoping that whatever happens at 8 p.m. doesn't really influence anything, but I'm going to consider that in some of the setups that we're going to discuss here for tomorrow's action going forward. Okay, so from a daily chart perspective, obviously we've already had a huge move from Friday's lows. We've even crept up, within 50 points of the all-time highs again. I think it made sense for the market to try to cool off a little bit today for a number of reasons that we mentioned, both the target zones for longs, whether they bought Tuesday or were buying dips earlier in the week, or got the bounce zone on Friday. To reset the chart a little bit, so it gave the sellers a chance to show us if they're present at all. And honestly, I didn't really feel like they were that present. I think that longs had a reason to sell. We didn't close below the 4-hour EMA. In fact, we closed the 4-hour chart candle from 10 to 2 p.m. today back over the EMA, which still is showing me that we're in a long bias situation in general. But the reason tomorrow is going to be an extremely important day is because even if, for example, even if we were going to be moving lower, and I don't particularly have a favorable bias as to which way we're going, I always just follow the chart. But even if we were going lower, it's almost never going to be like this dip in an immediate lower high and then just lower. It's almost always going to be the first dip gets bought. We have daily chart trends still holding below here. And generally what they would end up doing is flagging the shorts out, trapping longs overhead, and then breaking lower is typically the pattern that we'd see here. So I see this chart a few interesting ways. And again, hopefully, the 8 p.m. news is only just a micro move in the market. It doesn't really break the structures we're looking at for tomorrow or have a huge influence on them. But here's how I'm seeing it, is today's test was a big one. For me as a swing long from last Friday in the long-term accounts, I don't like if this breaks back under either both this higher low on the 4-hour chart at 73 and definitely don't like it under 52. The fact that we have broken lower and now recovered, if we do end up flagging through 85 tomorrow and then rejecting, this does bring the short side into play for me finally. I haven't had a reason to be short on this unless it's into a level into strength for the pullback to the trend that we know is holding on the 4-hour chart and the daily chart. But if we did kind of push through, let's say 85.50, come back down under 75, which is a big level now to watch, and then break under, this would actually qualify for me now as looking at short side. Mind you, we're pretty close to the daily EMA, but what I'd be looking for is I'd be looking for them to sweep the longs out under 30.75. There's still a risk level there that longs would be using from this session here on Tuesday. And so what I would be looking for actually is we'd be now looking more or less down here for bounce plays potentially. This could be a spot where, if we do end up shaking out the shorts, trapping longs overhead, getting back under 75, and then setting up a bear flag across the 4-hour chart and hourly chart, it would qualify for short side. But we'd be kind of just looking for the move to get under 63.50 and then ideally under 30.75. And then anywhere down here, I'd be looking for possible bounce plays anywhere down here. That's near the daily EMA and or under a prior daily chart candle's low, like Monday. Possibly Tuesdays. I mean, if it broke under 30, I would technically be starting to look there. It'd be a short cover target and definitely a place to start looking at long. So it just depends on where we get the setup. Never really just guessing like, oh, it's going to bounce here. It's gets into the zone and then we look for a setup to form to confirm it. Lately, it hasn't been our typical bottom bounce setup. Lately, you kind of have to wait for a failed breakdown and then buy into a little bit more strength than I like. Our setup is just, it's so deliciously good for risk reward when we have the 5-minute chart extension. That hasn't really been in fashion as much lately. So it just feels like it's bad risk reward at times when you're buying into a flag into an area down here, but typically in the big picture, it's not bad risk reward. If you think about Friday, that was kind of an obvious area of exhaustion. So even buying late on that was still a big reward area. From the daily chart perspective, the daily EMA is actually just under Tuesday's low. So if we did end up with a break lower tomorrow, for example, and again, that's not my particular bias, but it's possible. If we do break under there, I would expect that to be a target zone for shorts, and it'll be a target zone for me if I end up with a short signal. And it would be a place to expect longs to try to pick up on it, barring that there's no negative news. If there's a news event, then forget the technicals. It's just there's going to be a lot of overhead long selling. But even if we're going higher, this would be a natural progression in this chart, would be to trap longs overhead today, trap shorts early today, push them out, and then actually make the move tomorrow. And so if we end up with a short signal tomorrow under 75, for example, on the 4-hour chart and hourly chart, I'll show you how that would be confirmed in a minute. The daily chart candle coming into 30.75 would be interesting, especially if we can get a bounce set up somewhere down here, because generally speaking from there, we're going to bounce out. And then if we hold up, the chart's ready for new flags and higher. Or even if we aren't ready for higher, typically it's going to do, again, a fail flag like this before moving lower. This would be a daily chart break lower. Okay, so there's so many different angles out there right now, and the one thing that throws a little bit of a monkey wrench in it is the government shutdown news at 8 p.m. So that's why I think it'd be a gamble to be positioned in this before we see that news tomorrow. But from a technical perspective, it was a first interesting trend break attempt this week. If we're looking at it from the perspective of just this week, starting from Monday, and we're just going to go from like the low point on Monday to the low point on Tuesday, going into today. So this is where at the open today, like we talked about, just way out of range for new longs up there. So there's no question we weren't going long. Typically, I'm not going to be shorting, even though we could clearly see there was a level to break here at 81 where longs would be stopping. I'm not going to be shorting there because we still have the trend holding below. So that'd be almost similar to having shorted here yesterday. We don't want to short into that area because we don't know that it's going to break. It could easily hold like it did both Monday and Tuesday. So the idea today would be if they break that level and then recover it and hold, then we could reset the chart in a sense that we could be looking for higher. But I like this move where it, instead of recovering, it broke lower because it actually broke that trend. And this actually finally gave longs a reason to take profits from the last few days potentially. Since we didn't really have a setup for longs to buy here, I mean, unless they bought the dead open up here, which maybe some did, and hopefully if they did, they stopped out here. I would think that most of the selling would be from slightly more macro view players, longs from previous days that are playing off hourly chart, 4-hour chart, and daily chart trends. So I thought it was interesting because it was sort of like the first reason that longs had to sell. The reason why you don't see me taking shorts even after that first dip is because we could tell going into the close today, we could 100% tell that we were going to be in a chop zone from the 1-hour and 4-hour chart perspective. That's why we need this evening to kind of cool this off and then set us up for either this break lower tomorrow and I'm 50-50 on this. I could go either way with it. If we're holding up tomorrow and we flag, I'm into it for the long side as well, especially if we have a failed break lower and then recover. That would be enough for me to want to go long. So the interesting thing though is here is that we don't want to short this move because we don't know that, generally I don't think it's going to be sustainable. I'm actually more interested in looking at a bounce play in these areas. I suspect that we're either going to bounce under yesterday's lows if we were to get there, or all we really had to work with today was the prior breakout level 50 potentially becoming support. So today I was kind of looking for like long around or under 50 if I got it set up. Today I didn't, but from here now we kind of back tested this trend line, and we back tested the hourly chart and 4-hour chart trends. So this is where it becomes interesting. Okay, because a failure to recover from here now does trigger longs to sell, and they start selling, I think, under 63.50 and definitely under 52. It'd be too late to short under 52. So a couple ideas going into tomorrow without prolonging this too much. If government shutdown comes through and they say we're resuming business as usual and we get a micro push higher, if that fails, I think it makes the short side look better for tomorrow. I think it traps more longs overhead. It gives us more levels to break for lower, and I'm hoping that the result of that would be leading to a short signal and a bounce play. If we have the opposite effect and we end up breaking lower, let's say under 63.50 overnight, this could start to test some levels lower. But I think it would be a huge risk to be positioned in this at this point because it could really go either way, especially before they drop that news. So what I'm kind of hoping is that the news doesn't really break this consolidation in this sort of 4-hour chart pattern that we're building, because this is going to be a really important one to watch. So with that break today of the 3-day trend we've built since Monday's lows into Tuesday's higher low and broken it today, and we're back testing it, and we're kind of flirting around with it at this point, yeah, it becomes big now, because what I generally do is once we break a level like that is we will just widen this trend line over like this now to the more recent higher low, and to me that's kind of the line in the sand. I think that longs probably bought the dip today, and I think that they were fine to do so. That's why I was looking to buy down here if I got a setup for a day trade at least, and closing over the 4-hour charts bullish, minus any news that could influence this. So that would be obviously a really good entry point, and that's why we like to look for these bounce plays when we can find them, because now we're potentially setting up for a 4-hour chart flag. But this is big now, because if we actually, and I like the idea of getting bounce plays versus buying breakouts up here personally, because if any one of these flags now fails, what's going to happen is today's shorts will get stopped out. The overhead longs will get caught. So this is like what, maybe if the 8 p.m. news comes back positive, maybe longs get caught there. And then if we start to break back lower here, this is where this could start to really come undone. And it'd be sort of the first point in the chart where short, since last week, that the short side would become validated for me across the 4-hour chart, the hourly chart, and the structure would call for it. Now the other side of this is if we end up overnight, let's say mostly sideways, if the initial reaction to that news ends up being lower and we break under 73.50 then recover, then 100% I'm going to be looking at going long. That just shows me that the sellers tried not once but twice. They failed both times. The trend is still holding. This dip gives us another test towards the daily EMA. It holds on. Then we're just looking at standard multi-day flags again. But today was a day that I think that in order to really get a hold of this thing, it needed to be a bounce play would have been the best case. And it seemed to me like going into the close, we weren't really built up quite enough for a new flag to come in. That would be tomorrow or overnight if we're sort of setting up across the 4-hour chart here. So I just find that like across the board, there's a lot of nuances in this chart and a lot of angles on it. Also the daily chart in itself, if we just look at it, kind of objectively here, it's already made a pretty big move. So even if we are going higher, I'll be honest with you, although I'll trade either side tomorrow, depending on which way we set up as per usual without any preconceived bias, I kind of hope that this happens. I think that this would be the best setup for longs going forward, because it would it would kind of take that overhead out of it, the longs that kind of bought up here today. It might give us a chance to short tomorrow if we get the right setup for it, and it would potentially give us a chance for a real bounce play down here, which would then be able to get longs positioned in a way that this could actually look really good for the next leg up, start to build that flag up. It's kind of like chasing up here from this point, guys. That's why I'm not that interested in, getting overly bullish in these areas until we break one of these daily chart candles, higher lows, and kind of flush it out. So I'm hoping that we do get a chance for this to move lower this week, because I think it would give us the best potential setup in the big picture. Also, the other side of that is, if we break lower, it gives us a chance also to see if the sellers are serious here. I mean, if they start to lose the daily chart trend again like this, and they can't recover it, then then it's a daily chart back into a downtrend again, and retest the bigger trend lines. So there's just a lot of different angles here. I don't think that this point in the chart, guys, is one to be FOMOing over the long side on in the big picture. I think that the big picture setup that would be a lot more attractive would be if we happen to get lucky enough to get a pullback tomorrow or Friday that would then lead to retesting the daily chart trend, showing us it's holding, and then setting up a new flag. This is a much more attractive looking setup, in my opinion, from the bigger picture perspective. So if we get any chances where the market wants to go lower today or tomorrow, or Friday, this will be a big area to watch. Under Tuesday's lows, sub 30, it's also going to be a target zone for shorts, if any shorts are applicable going into tomorrow. So that's it, guys. From the 4-hour chart perspective, the way I'm seeing it is, even though the daily chart's looking a little bit out there, this trend is still holding for now. But this is the point now where you need to be really, really careful, because it's like any one of these flags that they fail and we break that 4-hour chart trend, there's going to be a reason for longs to be selling now. The first dip is never really as meaningful as the second dip. If we put a lower high in or do a fail flag now, it's going to trigger selling. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. So again, the ideas would be, if we get a push overnight and it fails, I'd start watching under 63.25 tomorrow to see if we can get a target down here and a bounce play ideally, and then hopefully a flag out early next week. The short side on an extension still applies. The over 69.10 I would be looking, but we have spent a decent amount of time in this area, so we might be a little bit more interested, like 69.20 plus. It just depends on the context when we get there. But if we spend all night consolidating, then breaking out, we're not going to be that extended on the 4-hour chart like we would have been today. If we broke up there today, then it would have been obvious extension from all trends. A little bit different if we're like sideways all night and then break up there. That would be not that extended. So we'll see how that looks tomorrow. But yeah, those are the main ideas I'm looking at, guys. For long side, I think it's great if we actually get a failed breakdown overnight and then recover and then flag, especially if we keep this area in play. That could come into play. So, there's lots of different angles and ways to look at it, but there's some nuances as well with the news coming at 8 p.m. So, as per usual, guys, we'll just, we'll pick it up in the morning. We'll see what levels are still relevant. Things can change overnight, but we'll have a game plan tomorrow morning at the open, as per usual on the stream. We'll see what levels are in play, and we'll kind of just take it from there. Looking to have a big finish to the week, guys. It's been more of a trailers market for longs from late last week, and a dip buyers market than a breakout buyers market. Today was the first blip. It's going to either lead us to a breakdown or more likely, a breakdown or a breakout attempt tomorrow. But I like this chart better for breakouts if we can move lower. So that's all the thoughts I have on it for now. Some interesting stuff out there leading into tomorrow. And the reason why I wanted to stay put into the close today was because we could tell from the 1-hour chart and 4-hour chart perspective that this was going to be a chop zone. And it's not that you can't find smaller day trades in there, but you could really tell that even if it did break back out over 80, I think the level was 80.50 earlier on the hourly chart, this isn't a complete pattern on the 1-hour chart and 4-hour chart. It would have just been a push to shake the shorts out and then stay in a chop zone. So this overnight session, I think we're just chopping, like this is where we're going to start building up, right, for either that move lower or higher tomorrow. You can see it on the 4-hour chart as well. And again, that doesn't mean that you can't, find a smaller trade here or there. We've spent 2.5 hours today trapping longs and building overhead over this VWAP area, and it was right into an hourly chart, potential hourly chart resistance. And it wasn't that, it can't move higher, because it can. It just wasn't ready to move higher there. What to me looked better was breaking lower, trapping the shorts, and then recovering, and then breaking out. So that was obviously today. There wasn't time for that to happen in regular trading hours. It's just building that pattern up now into the overnight session. So yeah, guys, we'll see what happens in 8 p.m. today. Hopefully we can keep these patterns and this overall structure in place for tomorrow, and then we'll kind of see what we can come up with based on those ideas. But definitely getting into sort of territory where longs that are in from previous days should be kind of on their toes a little bit. I'm sure that they're watching some of the same levels I am, and adjusting their stops on them. And at the same time, the bulls, despite everything, I mean, we still haven't seen a break of a 4-hour chart candles low under the EMA. So we still haven't really seen a true attempt for lower. This is just a blip, this dip right now. This would be more of a convincing sell signal once we break one of these guys through 63.25 or 52. So yeah, guys, so lots of angles there to look at. Looking forward to seeing what we can come up with. Thank you for tuning in today and this week, guys. I'm looking forward to the rest of the week. Have a nice night, and we'll see you tomorrow.